Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Friends of Europe's online Climate and Energy Summit. It's day 3. It's our final day, and hopefully now we will move to discussing, not hopefully, but we are discussing the grid. And greening the grid, and what are the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Yesterday we talked about transport, and the day before we talked about how do we look at the overall recovery plan and beyond COVID, but actually what we meant was working through COVID. Let's give you a quick recap of what our key contributors said about greening transport yesterday.
Hydrogen has a role to play when direct electrification is not possible for sectors where electricity cannot be used to abate emissions, the cement, the steel industry, for example, where you can use heat pumps or other technology.
Currently, electric vehicles are already much cleaner than diesel and petrol vehicles, and the electricity grid is becoming cleaner all the time. It is wrong to say that we have a completely coal-dominated grid. This is not China, and we're actually improving the grid every year. So this is wrong. And if you would believe the electricity grid is dirty, then I don't understand why you would promote hydrogen and e-fuels.
As of January next year, we are phasing out financing fossil fuels completely. And by the end of this year, and in fact, we are really finalizing our rules and procedures, so to align all our operations to be so-called Paris aligned already by the end of this year.
We have no problem with the money, as it's quite obvious, because the investments are really flowing in. We have no problem with the high quality regulation, because we are delivering on that. So what I hear from the industry is lack of high skilled people. And this would be the subject of my next foresight report, where we want to map up what kind of skills do we need.
There you go. Some interesting commentary. If you want to see that in full, visit our website and you'll be able to find it there directly. That was just a kind of a set of highlights, but it was a very interesting, thought-provoking debate, and we'll move on to that now also for today's discussion. But before I do introduce our speakers and the topic, just a few words of engagement. Those of you on Zoom, a very warm welcome to you. You know that you should have your video on, your name on your video, and make sure you're on mute. Should you wish to make a comment, raise a query, etc., use your virtual hand. And I also encourage all of you, those of you who want to make a comment and share with your thoughts with others, use the Zoom chat. And I'll be saying that a lot during this time, because we only have an hour and I may not be able to get to all of you. So in that time, please make sure you use the chat function so that you can ask questions to speakers, and speakers, I assure you, as they have done before, will respond to you. I also want to warmly welcome our live stream audience. Welcome to you. You're not left out. If you wish to raise a question, a query or frustration, please use hashtag Energy Climate Summit. I've got that wrong, hashtag Climate Energy Summit, to log your queries, and then we'll take them accordingly. So without further ado, greening the grid. As we've had this conversation, and this is the last bit of it, in terms of what do we do around energy in Europe, and making sure that we move to a cleaner, more sustainable, affordable energy source, if you like. The question that begs the biggest challenge is infrastructure and the grid. The grid is critical, and greening it is absolutely essential. There are vested interests in this. There's issue, well, we've heard from Maros yesterday, the commissioner, that money is not an issue. But there are ways of cooperation that are missing, and clearly there are a number of challenges with regard to digital and hacking and other matters that will actually affect this. What we do know this year, despite the crisis and the economic crisis that we're in, it was a bumper year this year for renewables. In May, a lot of the output and energy consumption for Europe came from renewables. As we had the hottest year on record, renewables had their day, if you like. So in that context, I want to bring in Laura Cosi from the International Energy Agency, who brought out a report recently And in that, Laura, a very warm welcome to you. Hello.
Dharmendra, hello.
Nice to see you again. Laura, your report came out. I don't want to focus on all the detail, but roughly you're saying that solar becomes king. And what are the implications of that for Europe?
Thank you, Dharmendra. So since we are talking from Belgium, our latest World Energy Outlook really crowned, if you want, the royal family. On the one hand, we see really solar becoming the king. What does it mean? We are expecting most of the new electricity production globally coming from solar. The reason is simple. Solar is becoming very cheap, and there is more than 120 countries that are supporting it. So if you are a solar developer and you go and ask for money, you will get very cheap financing. So the combination of a cheap technology and cheap financing are making solar very, very competitive. Why did I say we crown the royal family? Really is, if you look at Europe, wind is also, if you want, the queen. In 2020, you just mentioned it, Dharmendra, we saw a lot of renewables. For the first time, our data show actually that wind produced more light for our homes and for our grid in Europe than coal ever. So it's a big milestone and a very important one.
Sure.
Now, these additional variable renewables, intermittent renewables, if you wish, they will increase even further in the next decade. This is excellent news. On the other hand, it asks for a change in the way we deal with our electricity system. In particular, one point I would like to mention here, and it's very much the topic of this session, we will need to install many more kilometers of grids. So globally, to just give you a sense of scale, is twice as much what we have built in the past 10 years. Is several times the distance from here to the moon, 40 times. So it's a lot of cables. It's a lot of money. And these cables are not dumb cables. More and more, we want these cables to be clever. We want a clever grid. We want a smart grid. On one end, to protect us from potential cyber attacks, but also to green the grid further. We want our electric vehicles to be charged when we have very low CO2 emissions. We want to give back capacity to the grid. So it's an increasing investment that comes with it, which is a challenge, because there is a lot of new cables to be installed and a lot of new smartness. With it, there are challenges and a lot of opportunities as well.
Thank you. That was very clear. When you say that, it's like you referred to the travel to the moon, in what time scale?
It's really the next decade.
Okay.
If we want to decarbonize and meet, especially the European 2030 targets, whatever the ambition, the lowest to the highest, really we need to focus on extending the grids. It will not be the only option of increasing flexibility. We will have battery storage, we will have demand-side response, but the grids remain really central.
And so clever cables, a very difficult iteration there. What do you think we have that capacity in Europe? Have you seen it elsewhere?
Certainly, I think that as in many areas, Europe is really at the forefront.
Okay.
We have a lot of companies that are now combining not only electricity but digital, which is really the future. And this is really the marriage that has to continue going forward. This is certainly an area of big opportunity for investments, for new employment, really. This is another analysis that we have recently done. We can bring in a lot more people working in this area. So certainly an area that we would look as a big opportunity area.
That's good to know, because there was that point raised again by the Commissioner yesterday about, and it's not been mentioned a lot, about the skills that are required, but also in the context of where we find ourselves in the economy, how do you transition workforces into a very different context, if you like, and ensure they are employable, but have employment too? And that's really heartening to hear from you. Laura, what's the single most important thing governments can do to decarbonize their systems? Really big question, I know, but what's the one thing they should be doing?
Dharmendra, unfortunately, I wish we would have the equivalent of the vaccine for COVID for climate change.
Okay.
We really don't have this one-to-one.
Okay.
So I'd like to say at least three things.
Lovely, okay.
First, we have focused on the electricity sector and we should continue, but decarbonizing is beyond power. So we should now move beyond the power sector and accelerate that. Yesterday you spoke about transport, we need to talk about buildings, we need to talk about industries, importantly.
Indeed.
Second, I'd say that even in our analysis, even once we take into account all the net zero targets around the world, Europe, the recent ones, China by 2060, we are still only getting 1/3 to where we would need to go. So government need to engage in big global diplomacy. This would be the second point. And my third and final point would be sometimes we think as greening as part of a bit of a green movement, a bit hippie. It's not like that. In fact, moving into green is very much moving every week into infrastructure week. It's about big investments. It's about big opportunities. So really shift our mindset, and governments conduce and enable industries, investors, and citizens to go into this big new wave of investments.
Laura, that's really very helpful, and as ever, you and Fatih always give us this sense of clarity about what needs to be done, but often money, politics, and infrastructure get in the way. But I like what you just said now about the fact that perhaps our narrative needs to change, that green becomes an economic enabler and a driver rather than a disabler and full of challenge. On that note, let me move to, thank you very much, and I'll come back to you. I want to move to Vincent from RT, energy, a grid provider. And you've heard from Lara what some of the issues are, and you may have read the report that they came out with. Do you have the technology you need in terms of enabling a green grid in Europe?
Hello, thank you for
warm
giving
welcome.
me the opportunity to deliver a message from a kind of industrial operator. And you're right about raising the question of technology, but first, before I would like just to align my message with one of Laura Cosi, saying that if we want the energy transition, we really need the grids. And we as transmission system operator will be at the interface of many of the changes, of the evolutions that are ahead of us. We have to connect, of course, offshore wind generation, large renewable sources, and connect them to large consumption centers. And this is our activities, normal activities. As system operators, we are at the interface to integrate new usages of electricity like e-mobility and develop sectorial integration that was mentioned with hydrogen, for instance. All this will be connected at some point with our grids, or we have to manage the balance of all that. And we will have to be learn how to manage a more volatile, a more flexible systems, overcoming many hazards coming from wind, sun, temperatures. This is the one we know best at the moment, but the wind and solar is really coming high now on the agenda. And our business is to keep the frequency as 50 hertz every second on the whole continental Europe, which is the biggest machine on Earth, in fact, that the man has built so far. And it has to be to stay at a reasonable cost, affordable cost for consumers, of course. So when that is said, when the diagnostic is made, then how can we do to support all these transformations? And we really have the feeling that as transmission operator, we are to undergo a real industrial shift toward green technologies, and in a wave of investments not seen for years, as Mrs. Cosi reminded us. And this is the case for RTE, who has a plan to invest 33 billion euro over the next 15 years, which represent more or less double that what we invested in the recent past. So it's a change of dynamics, I would say. And with this money, we will of course connect offshore winds in France. We are not the first country in Europe on the offshore business, but we would like to develop really the floating wind business, which is a new technology, more suitable for our coastal conditions rather than North Sea. We will have also to double the French interconnection capacity with our neighboring countries, because there is solidarity on the European network. And of course, we will also have to go under a kind of a digital transformation, a digital revolution, a no regret solution where we will invest like 3 billion euro in this transformation, because we know we will have to manage 10 times more data than what we manage today to integrate all the new flexibility service, demand response, e-mobility, and so forth, and transform our industrial tools in more digital way, having digital power substations, and so on. And so at the same time, we know that grid technology will evolve with more high voltage direct current links it's not synchronous power, it's direct current, and HVDC, as we call it, is a kind of new technology that allows to transport a lot of energy over long distance with less losses, but it's very expensive, and so we use it for onshore and offshore in very specific conditions. Offshore to connect large windmills, of course, but also onshore to connect interconnections, build interconnections, and like crossing mountains, we are building now an interconnection with Italy. And at the same time, we know we will have less synchronous power plants on the systems to give the frequency at 50 Hz. I know it's a kind of specialist questions, but it's a very hard question for us, how to keep the frequency at 50 Hz when we will not have any normal synchronous plant, rotating plant on the network, and we will have to put power electronics in the network, which is another technological evolution. And so yes, the technology is here, but the question is now the pace of to develop and to have this technology on time to have a timely realization of our network investment plan.
Okay.
And this is a question for Europe, how to support the TSO in being on time about developing and adapting the network.
Yeah. So okay, Vincent, if I can pause you for a second. So that's good to know about what the size of the challenge is, obviously. And you say the technology is there, but I also heard you say that, you know, there's bits about connectivity that you need to have greater, let's say, power and inter-Europe or inter-member state cooperation in different ways. So if you were to say, look, you know, from, let's say, up to, think about, do you have like 60% of what you need? And you need to have a stretch for the rest? And in what time scale? Is it a similar time scale to what, Laura, I posed the question about the next, is it the next 10 years? Or is it a shorter time distance for you, time frame for you?
Well, I think there are different time horizons when you consider different things. If we look at digital transformation, that should go fast because the time of developing IT tools, of integrating or having a co-development of pan-European tools to operate in a more efficient way for system of operation every second, having a wider image of the network at a European or regional scale at least. This goes fast, and with the clean energy package, we know we have to move even faster to build these pan-European digital tools for our own needs.
Okay.
If you go in other questions like connecting offshore windmills and HVDC is really on its way. This is, I'm sure it's more than 60% of what we need that already exists. But there are questions of efficiency and the way maybe we buy in Europe and maybe the way we incentivize the suppliers to develop the technology in Europe, to develop jobs and skills.
Okay.
When at the time, there's a question of foreign dependencies, maybe with the suppliers at the moment. So the question of strategic question for Europe. That's why we would like to be part of the industrial forums and this industrial ecosystem that the EU Commission is working around.
Yeah.
But we know we will be on time. And if you look at other technology like hydrogens, maybe for the French situation I'm talking about, I don't know about all the other countries, but might need some more time to be ready and have the right scale development and be affordable.
And yesterday we heard from both Enel and Engie about the challenge and opportunities around hydrogen and the fact that it's not the panacea we think it is. It should be part of the mix. But let me, the point you made about the fact that there's a challenge here about scale up. There's not what I hear from you is that you want to be part of these industrial forums. And those of you who look at the program, you'll know that I'll be in conversation with Kadri Simpson at 3 o'clock. So tune into that and continue to be engaged around this. You can ask some of these questions. Because my assumption would be that you're part of that conversation, industry forums, that the Commission's engaged in. But tell me, this is not about a protectionist agenda. What you've said is, how do you create a level of self-sufficiency and use the standards and approaches to make sure, and diplomacy, to make sure we're still an open continent that's able to compete globally. But if we're to do that, R&D is key. Now, yesterday we heard from the Commissioner, Maroš Šefčovič, that they're investing a huge amount of money in energy infrastructure and a transition, etc., through Horizon and other pockets of money. We've got the largest recovery fund ever in history in the EU. Is there, from your point of view, coherence between what the EU is funding in terms of R&D and what you fund in R&D? Is there a link? Are you all speaking to each other? Is there some sort of coherence or synergy between what they do, which is huge, but also what you in the private sector do, which is massive?
Hopefully we are part of the conversation, and
That's a diplomatic response, Vincent. We want to rough things up a little bit. Tell us the truth. Are you part? No, tell us. Is it coherent or not? Is it coherent or not?
It's never enough. It's never enough, of course. And but we are already part of R&D EU-funded projects. For instance, I talked about power electronics, and to see how to manage a network with less rotating plants on the networks and to keep the frequency at 50 Hz. This is a really complex issue, and this is R&D that is funded by Europe. This is good news. But the question of R&D funding is certainly, Horizon 2020 is certainly a key point, how to push the financing to market solution, to industrial solution, and not to remain at the to R&D very high intellectual level, I would say, how to go concrete. But I think it's not only R&D funding, it's also how to create a market that is attractive.
Indeed.
When we look at what we buy in Europe, we all buy with our own public procurement rules in our own country with our own standards. So there is a lot of effort also to be made there. And I think the third point is to go ecological. We need more, I guess, incentives in the regulation, in the way we buy, also to push technology supplier towards eco design, to push the question of biodiversity respect, and all this must be rewarded in the way we buy, and also maybe we could get more incentives from Europe when Europe is funding and helping, and we will really
okay. And you're being very effective, but you're also being diplomatic. I'm going to break this down. Are you involved in the front door of the conversations around R&D funding and the future of the kind of incentives that the Commission is planning? Are you, as an industry player, involved in those conversations at an early stage? Yes or no?
We are looking at it. I'm not sure we are the first one that the Commission discussed with, because we are small players if we look at the money compared to other. But I think the Commission is aware that our infrastructure are vital infrastructure, critical infrastructures, and even though we are small, we are critical to get the transition done and the ecological transition.
Sure. Sorry, Vincent, I had to push you, because I think we need to know. This is these kind of conversations, if it's not going to be something just on the shelf that we forget, it's about generating ideas and things that we need to see happen. And time is running out, as you know well. And so it's really important that we have a level of frankness and engagement, and I suppose speak truth to power about how we move this forward. And actually, at this stage of the 21st century, it's just not good enough that government works in a way that doesn't co-produce solutions with citizens and providers and suppliers, if you like. So we'll raise that with Kadri this afternoon. I won't mention your name, don't worry. We'll talk about industry more generally. I want to encourage all of you to engage in this conversation. Use your virtual hand, colleagues. Don't be bystanders. I really want to hear we want to hear from you, what your views are, thoughts are. So you raise your virtual hand and engage. If you have, doesn't have to be a question, you could just might be a frustration, air it. We want to hear it. But I do want to, so I'm going to open this up to a bit of a conversation before I bring in our other two contributors to this debate. I have someone from our live stream audience. So Charlotte, welcome. We have someone from on Twitter.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Hello.
So we received a question via Twitter on energy efficiency. So this person would like to know, like, a focus on electrification and renewable energy is definitely good, but shouldn't we also talk about energy efficiency?
Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. I'm going to push that right back to Laura. It's something that you and Fatih Birol have spoken about for almost 3 or 4 years, if not longer. What's your response to what you just heard?
Absolutely, absolutely, it's key, and the recent numbers and news are not necessarily very good on energy efficiency. We are seeing a slowdown of energy efficiency improvements. Let me just give you one example in the road transport sector. Road transport sector, we very often when we open the newspapers, read about electric vehicles, and we have the impression that everything is going very well.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when we look at the numbers for 2020, we have about globally 3% of cars that were sold were electric vehicles, a significant increase from 2% the previous year. But the largest segment that was sold was sport utility vehicles, large cars, 42%. 2020, 42% of car sales globally were SUVs.
Mm.
This jumped from 39% the year before. So if you want, we are going as individuals towards less efficient, bigger things. And our additional worry is that as the pandemic is leaving scars and will leave scars going forward, some of us, some of the poorest will become poorer, and the incentive and the ability to pay premium for more efficient product will go down. So certainly an area in which we are really warning governments to pay much more attention, or the risk of slowing down is going to be important. Big praise clearly for the big renovation wave that the EU put forward, but this has to become much even more holistic, involving industry, involving citizens. So
Laura, thank you very much for that.
Huge,
yeah, thank you very much. And you're right, you know, the past 50 years is characterized by societies being high consuming, greedy, fat, and, you know, deferring gratification, or rather kind of saying, actually, I'll wait till tomorrow, and this is not important to me, rather than actually the challenge is now, and we need to think about behavior. But actually markets can nudge behavior. It was interesting, yesterday William, the Director General of Transport Energy, said that sometimes our policy approach shouldn't be about a demand-led approach. Sometimes we need to be interventionist in the market so that we're able to generate cheaper electric cars, and through that process nudge behavior. And I thought that was a very interesting point, and actually one that more governments should be thinking about together with the private sector. I want to move to, and thank you for that, Laura, I want to move to Carolina Petruzzi, if I've got that right. Is it Caroline?
Yes, hi, it's Caroline.
Hi, Caroline. Welcome. Introduce yourself and what your question is, sorry.
Sure. I'm Caroline Petruzzi-Miquel. I'm a lawyer with Cleary Gottlieb based in Paris, and I follow sustainability issues. And I have a question for RTE, which is, you know, sitting here in France. Obviously, in France, we're very dependent on nuclear, which is a very stable source of power generation. And so I'm curious, how do you anticipate this transition in terms of supply and stability of supply, where tomorrow will be more dependent on solar and wind, which obviously we can't control quite as easily?
And what's your view on nuclear, if I can press you on that? Because, you know, it's it's the only power in the current member configuration. It's a nuclear power. What's your view on nuclear, Caroline?
I think it's well, I guess there's lots of arguments for and against. You know, the importance is that, you know, it needs to be a safe and stable source of energy, and there are certainly sources that are more safe in the long term than nuclear. But obviously, nuclear is clean, so it's done us very well in France.
Sure, indeed. I always get this sense, and sorry to press you, it's just that there's always this nervousness, or people clench their chests and say, I can't really talk about nuclear. And actually, we need an honest and pragmatic conversation about it, so that and we've seen some of the movements that have happened historically this week around nuclear, but it's one of those things that isn't going to go away. And we need to kind of confront it at the EU level. I'm going to move to another question. Bruce Douglas, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks a lot.
Hello. Introduce yourself and your question.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Bruce Douglas. I'm the Director of Communications and Business at Euroelectric, and previously spent 20 years in the renewable energy industry in Wind Europe and Solar Power Europe, and coordinating the resource platform, which is the group supporting corporate sourcing of renewables. And the question is on corporate sourcing, and maybe just touches on and goes beyond what Caroline just mentioned about matching supply and demand. And there's a huge movement now with corporates in RE100 sourcing renewable energy to cover their demand. And some are even now pushing even further increased granularity of that down to 24/7 sort of hourly matching of supply and demand
so
renewables.
Let's get to your question or your point.
So the question is to Vincent, I suppose, and anybody else who's on the call, is how do you see that going forward, and how would you, from a technological, business model and policy point of view, ensure the matching down to an hourly basis as more and more corporates are demanding that?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And what I can suggest is, Bruce, also, could you put on the chat what your views are and what you think should happen so that we all share together? And those of you who I'm not able to bring in, please again use the Zoom chat to respond to both our questioners, actually. Before I move on to Niels, our parliamentarian, Vincent, do you want to respond to what you've just heard very briefly? Vincent? Hi.
I had to activate my, sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
Well, to be short, a very interesting question, up to date, of course, because of course studies are still going on, and maybe you heard that the government has asked, and French government has asked RTE and with IEA to work on a 100% renewable scenario around 2050 on the longer term, of course.
Yeah.
And the study will certainly go out, I guess, in the coming months. So it's just a question of days to discover what our minds on this very important questions, to see and identify the problems and discuss the possible solutions. But again, it's a way forward. We don't have all answer right now, but we are doing R&D, we are doing studies about that, and also ENSOE, our European Association, has made some seminars like last week, and some of you may have attended to this seminar. Same question: how do we do for the future? So I don't have the complete answer, of course, and I'm not a specialist, but there's certainly a progressive approach. First, the renewable energy plants can deliver some kind of flexibility, some kind of balancing services. So we have to learn how to contractualize that with them. There will be more flexible solution on the network with storage. E-mobility is a kind of storage, decentralized storage, and so we will have to learn how to integrate this in the system operation. And of course, we will go towards a kind of consumer-centric, more flexible system with hopefully more demand response in the future. There's a question also of connected object in the houses and at work, to see if it can bring some more flexibility to match demand and offer.
Thank you for that. And also, I said, those of you who asked the questions, respond to what you've heard. Whether you agree, disagree, or set out what you think some of the increasing challenges or the current ones are from your perspective, because some of us who are closer to the topic are able to offer solutions or thoughts that can be help us move things forward. I'm now going to turn to the Parliament, and we've got a parliamentarian who's been waiting patiently. Niels, a very warm welcome to you. Hello.
Thank you so much.
Hello, good to have you with us. Niels, the Parliament has been pushing for 60% reduction in emissions, bringing down emissions by 2030. Tell us, what's the single most important, effective lever we need to be pushing for, from your perspective?
Well, I think there are obviously many, but if I had to pick one, I would say renewable energy, the Renewable Energy Directive. We are making this climate law right now, saying we are in the Parliament are saying 60% reductions in 2030. Right now, the European Union has a goal of 40%, so we are raising it by 20% points. In order to reach that goal, we obviously need much more renewable energy. Right now, the European Union has a goal of 32% renewable energy in 2030. And even with the business as usual scenarios, if we did nothing other than just let the development go as it goes, we will overachieve that goal. So right now, the target of 32% renewables in the EU in 2030 does not lead to any increased ambition. It doesn't push us to go anywhere, and we need to change that. So I think the Renewable Energy Directive, which we know that it will be revised next year, the European Commission will come with a new proposal. We need to get that right, and basically set much higher targets and set targets for countries individually that are legally binding to make sure that we expand our renewable energy.
Niels, What's your sense of cross-political party consensus on this subject? Because as ever, you know, there's politics at the heart of this. You know, if we didn't have the politics, we might be much faster and far ahead of the curve on this agenda. Just very briefly, tell us, you know, in terms of the directive and other movements in this on this agenda, do you get a sense that you guys are working together differently on this agenda, or are you still sticking to regional needs, desires, and, you know, not in my backyard kind of approach?
Well, there are
Tough question, I know.
It's a pretty tough question, but I mean, the geography certainly plays a role. You have an east-west, you know, I wouldn't say conflict, but different points of view on how fast this should go.
Yep.
But you also, of course, have ideological differences, ideological politics. And I think if we look at the climate law and the 60% reductions that we just voted for, it was an alliance of the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the Liberals.
Okay.
And then we had some conservatives coming over to 60%, but the majority of the conservatives did not want to go as far. So the alliance, and it was a pretty narrow majority, the alliance was basically Liberals, Social Democrats, and Greens, and then pulling some of the conservatives. And that's what I hope we can do for the renewable energy directive as well.
Good to know, because actually, you know, this is genuinely, as we know, we've experienced this year, but also the COVID crisis should demonstrate to political leaders this is beyond politics and ideological differences if they get real. And I hope that you're able to succeed in getting the Conservatives across, which actually would help them secure their own tenure in the future if they acted with a level of urgency. What do we need to do to get member states to cooperate more effectively on this situation around the energy system, from your perspective? What do you need? What will you do?
I think we need, you know, right now we are negotiating the budget for the next 7 years in the European Union, and we're also negotiating the recovery package, that package that of 750 billion euros that we are going to spend to handle Corona, or to kickstart the economy in the Corona crisis. And I think we need to make sure that these funds go in the direction of renewable energy. Right now, we are talking about that 30% of the funds needs to be earmarked for climate action, and I think that is a precondition for that all this can happen. Poland, we could take Poland as an example. They have a lot of, obviously, of coal energy, and they need to change it.
Yep.
And it is difficult for them because there are so many jobs involved. And so I think we need also from the EU budget to support a country like Poland in making that transformation. And I think that will be a precondition for getting Poland and other countries along.
Well, as we've heard from Laura, I think that, you know, the World Energy Outlook sets out kind of a premise for change, but as she said, there's opportunities for economic growth and for skills development and jobs. I suppose the narrative can't be about, oh, we're going to lose jobs. It's about the narrative of opportunity, that this can lead to better jobs, more sustainability, and actually your lives will be cleaner. Thank you, Niels. I'm sure there'll be references to what you've been saying. But just a thought, you've heard from the private sector. Wouldn't it be interesting if the Alliance brought together the biggest players across Europe, the TSOs and others, to have a conversation about what's required, and from the Parliament, as parliamentarians, lead the way in terms of your scrutiny and capability to pull together a big alliance with the private sector and take it forward on this agenda? It's just a thought. You might be doing it already, but there's nothing like that kind of vibration that sets through politics to say, actually, we're working differently about this and creating solutions. On that note, I want to move to a local politician, Belgium, and we have the Minister of State regarding energy and other matters. Tine, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you,
it's lovely to have you with us. You're, you know, a member of a brand new government, walking into the most difficult scenario, yet you are smiling and looking optimistic, which is good to know. It's very good to know. I just want to ask you a very simple question, Tina. Is is the subject matter of energy, is it an opportunity and something for hope, or is it full of despair and challenge? Slightly kind of philosophical Shakespearean question, but I'm sure you can handle that one.
I think energy is a challenge, but most of all, it's absolutely a matter of hope. As you mentioned, I'm new as a minister, but I'm familiar I'm working in the energy sector now for more than 10 years. Energy is where my heart is, also where my expertise is, and this will guide us forward. But with regard to your question, 2020, as was mentioned before, will probably be the hottest year on record, and it will be again a wake-up call for us to act. And climate ambition is something that citizens are asking for, that scientists agree on, but also what the industry and private sector is ready for. And at the same time, at this moment, we are experiencing a worldwide health crisis. And I think COVID is now accelerating at a speed and scale that the world has never seen. How we as consumers reconfigure our lives, our habits, and also our spending patterns. And in this crisis, I think it's important to note that energy has always been an imperative for a modern society. And that will not be different in the COVID-19 recovery challenge. Energy will be, absolutely convinced, a building block for the future. This is also how Europe is reacting, as was mentioned by the speaker before me. The mainstreaming of financing in recovery for climate and for energy is one of the examples. And I think to conclude that to be up to the challenge, I think we need two things. At the one hand, we need innovative solutions. And our TSO, Elia, who is also linked with the German TSO, 50 Hertz, has inaugurated last week or 2 weeks ago, first hybrid interconnector in the Baltic Sea. But these are kinds of innovative business solutions that will help us through the challenge, that will lets us face the crisis, and which will move on and will move forward and create a lot of welfare. But at the same time, I think these innovative solutions cannot exist without innovative policies.
Yeah.
And a coherent strategy at the national level, at the international level, will be key to provide a framework for these solutions I've lost my sentence, but the policy will be key for these solutions to thrive. And to quote Carlota Perez, technology provides the options, but society chooses the future.
Indeed it does, but often that society is riven with divisions, politics, those who have, those who don't have, and a mixture of other matters which determine the outcomes we achieve as societies. Do you know, from your perspective right now, what level of cooperation are you enjoying with other member states on this agenda? You're, Minister for Energy. Surely you're having bilaterals, multilaterals with others, so that we can solve this conundrum of energy being the thing that needs to be. It's interconnected with levels of investment that helps all of you rise up, rather than thinking about behind your back and saying, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm only here from the 1st of October, so 28 days. But
I know, I'm sorry, that was a very challenging question on my part. I do apologize, it's true. But
in my first 28 days, I've met with 2 European Commissions. One of those will also be present in this panel, Ms. Katja Simpson, but also with her colleague Margarita Vestager, because also competition policy will be a big issue and a big challenge with regard to energy policies. And what I'm absolutely looking forward to is that as Belgium, we will preside the North Sea Energies Corporations in 2021, so next year, together with Kadri Simpson. That is a shared presidency between the European Commission and a member state, in this case Belgium. And I think here in Belgium, I say we need to take energy in our own hands, but taking energy in our own hands means also reach out to our neighboring countries. Belgium is a very interconnected country.
Indeed.
With France, with other countries also. So we cannot survive. We cannot manage our energy policy without working together with other member states. So,
indeed,
yeah.
Go on. Sorry, let you finish.
No, it's okay.
And the question of money. We heard that, from the commissioner yesterday, Vice President Marosh, that, money is not an issue. Is money an issue for Belgium? Investment in this area?
Money is absolutely an issue, as will be, I think, in many other member states.
Exactly.
But we are absolutely convinced that public investments are key to face the challenge, the recovery challenge in a climate crisis. And so we will, this new government has also taken the ambition to increase public investments. And with regard to these public investments, energy infrastructure will be one of the key axes to invest. So if we work together, governments and also private partners, I think we can align and we can go along. We can go together a long way.
Thank you very much for that, responding to my challenging questions, and we wish you luck. It's a hard task, especially with a government that's been in limbo for a long time, and now we finally have one in Belgium. But you have let's hope the stars align around you and the others to move this forward in earnest, because my goodness, it's required. As I said, I'm going to be in conversation with Kadri Simpson at 3. So those of you who want to ask questions of her or any issues, start noting them down on Zoom, on the chat, so that we can be ready and prepared to have a fulsome conversation with her. I want to bring in our Twitter again, because those of you on Zoom, you're clearly reticent, shy, or not in the mood to play. So I'm going to go back to Charlotte. Charlotte, we have someone else from our live stream audience?
Yes, indeed, we do. This time it's related to COVID-19 and its impact on the transition to renewable energy. Will it impact that transition, and what will be the effect of the second wave of COVID-19 on the transition to renewable energy?
And was that a question to anyone specific?
That was sent via our Twitter community, not to anyone specific.
Absolutely, no worries at all. I'm going to bring in Niels for that, if I may, but also Laura to respond to that question. Niels?
Yes, so whether COVID-19 will be an opportunity for boosting climate action,
or a barrier.
Or not, sorry?
Or a barrier.
Or a barrier. I think, it could be both. I remember after the financial crisis of 2008, I think that crisis was certainly a barrier to action. We had an opportunity there at the Copenhagen summit in 2009, which was wasted completely. And I actually worked, before I was elected in this mandate, I worked for some years in the European Parliament. I remember how the action basically stopped after the financial crisis, because everybody argued that we couldn't afford the action, and we had to prioritize jobs and not put up requirements for the companies and so on. I think this time is different. I think we have shown that we're not backing down from our ambitions. We have just voted the 60% in the European Parliament. The European Commission has been very clear that it will not cancel or halt the Green Deal. And the recovery package that we have agreed, there's no doubt that we are going to use that for climate action. So I hope, and I think from what I can see until now, that this time is different. So hopefully we learn something from the financial
Niels,
crisis.
yes, absolutely. People have said that, even throughout these past 2 days. People said that there's definitely a different sentiment and mood among citizens and players, that we're not rushing away and thinking, actually, the financial crisis, we've forgot the lessons and we just move on to a different kind of business as usual. There's something different right now taking place. And I will share with you some of our polls that we've been surveying citizens over the past 3 years about what they want from the European Commission, and it makes for interesting reading. And again, it bolsters your point that I think there's a sense of the need to move on this agenda. Laura, briefly, do you want to just say, just respond to that question, where you've seen from your perspective momentum rather than the barrier?
Dharmendra, maybe 3 data points.
Yeah.
The first one, when we look at the energy mix globally, renewables have indeed proven more resilient than any other fuel. So coal has gone down, oil has gone down, gas has gone down, but solar and wind have proven much more resilient. So this gives us hope. There is also a warning that I would like to give. We are checking month after month how CO2 emissions level, where are they? And for China, that accounts for 30% of global emissions. In April, we were back to already last year's levels.
Goodness.
This basically means that I completely agree with what Niels said. We are not in the same situation we were in 2008, 2009. The reason is that costs have gone down, but there needs to be government pushing for sustainable recoveries. Very similar to what the EU has done. This is not global yet. So we need to make sure that this funding for sustainable recovery become much more universal. And there is not an ideological issue anymore. Spending the money in energy efficiency, in grids, in renewables, in innovation boosts growth, provides new jobs, and puts us on a much more sustainable path. This is data, not ideological statements.
Excellent. Just what we need to hear. Thank you, Laura. Very, very, very effective again, and I hope that our citizen that posed the question is satisfied with that. But also those essential data points, I hope that you can also put them on the Zoom chat, because I think that wraps up what some of the key issues for us when we learn from the last crisis, Laura. So that'll be really helpful. I want to welcome Kadri Simpson to the audience grouping here right now. Thank you for joining us and listening. I'll introduce you and welcome you at 3. But thank you and a warm welcome for joining us. I want to move to one of our other Zoom people, Matthias Frumeri.
Thanks. And I was just happy to hear that question.
Do introduce yourself, sorry.
Hi. I'm Matthias Frumeri. I'm the Swedish Chief Negotiator for Climate in the UNFCCC, the International Climate Negotiations. And we've been working quite intensely on what we call the green recovery for the past couple of months. And I think it's been encouraging to see how quickly that concept has picked up. But I definitely agree with Laura that from the IEA that, I mean, it's a concept we need to see globally established. And we've done a good job, I think, in Europe, and we, as member states, need to be implementing those kind of policies within our budget frameworks. But we could do more, definitely, to make sure that it sort of gets a global reach and that we're supporting countries to be implementing those kind of policies. I mean, another data point from the IMF pointing to that there are some $12,000 billion being allocated in various fiscal measures globally. So if we make best use of those, we can actually accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, and then sort of come out of the COVID crisis, maybe even in a better state in relation to the climate crisis than we were moving into or coming into the COVID crisis. But also, of course, the opposite is true. You know, if we don't make best use of funding, we'll be coming out of the COVID crisis in an even worse state fighting the climate crisis. So we have really an opportunity here, but there's also a sort of a window which we have to make best use of.
Matthias, thank you for raising that point. One of my worries and one of our worries is that you're right, is that there's bucketfuls of money, shed loads of money being put in. And I suppose that's a recognition of the commitment to deal with a crisis. But you know, one of the things that worries us is that how do you ensure there's a right governance mechanism so there's accountability and transparency underneath it? Because what we've learned from the last crisis is money went into black holes and the private sector without actually seeing change in the pockets of the ordinary citizen. And we need to make sure that this time round this happens more effectively, because otherwise the game's up and I think people will be unforgiving. But we need to find a way, I think, that this money gets to where it needs to. But also I'm concerned that in the way in which member states and other public institutions and players were not prepared for the crisis, how do you ensure that there's a marketplace, projects ready in each member state to absorb this capacity? And I'm not sure it's there. So we need to be thinking more carefully and in a more sophisticated manner to make sure that the money has the right infrastructure to get into, but also the public dimension. So thank you very much for that and for that question. And obviously, any views you have, please do, as I keep on reminding you, use the Zoom chat. Okay, it's that time. Thank you all our contributors for doing the do insofar as the contributors to this debate so far. I'm going to, and thank you all for participating, but don't go, don't leave, stay. We're now going to seamlessly move into a conversation with the Commissioner, Kadri Simpson. Kadri, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good
Thank
afternoon.
you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. You've heard some of the debate whilst you've joined us a little bit earlier. Tell us, at the moment, from what you're seeing in this context, for you leading the energy portfolio, what do you see as one of the biggest challenges for you at the moment in that regard?
Well, as you know, energy is responsible for the majority of our emissions, and that's why we can't achieve our very ambitious goals without energy doing its part.
Yeah.
But of course, all the sectors, they have to contribute. And my biggest challenge is that if we have set our sights for achieving climate neutrality by 2050, we actually have to raise our targets significantly already for this decade. So climate target plan that was just adopted in September, it has raised our greenhouse gas emission reduction by at least 55% by 2030. And this action is very ambitious if you keep in mind that the previous target was only 40%. So such a move implies that we need to be both bold in terms of thinking, but also with investments. Mm-hmm. So a change of this magnitude requires an additional 350 billion euros per year mm-hmm. compared to previous decades. So this is a very challenging situation, and we need all EU funds, but also national funds and especially private investment to achieve our targets.
And I mean, what we heard, we had Frans Timmermans on our flagship event last week, Festival Politics Ideas, where he said, you know, this is both unforgiving but not also a greatest opportunity, but we need to have pressure placed upon us. And I suppose the issue for you will be, how do you get your Team EU colleagues all online? And my sense is you are, but I'm not sure you're going to share with us if none of those are in tune with you. But there is always an east-west divide. Tell us, what do we need to do to make sure what's required to achieve the energy transition from that perspective of getting everyone in place?
Well, there are different actions that we can do in within a very short time span. Of course, well, the major investments for grids, they will take longer time, but there are still actions that we can front load, and in this perspective, we are not starting from scratches. We have national energy and climate plans, and that means that all our member states, they have made their plans how they will achieve a greener and cleaner energy system. And of course, there are some proposals that will help our economy, our compatibility, but also that will help us to achieve our targets in energy efficiency. And by that, I am referring to the renovation wave, which has been very warmly accepted by all the member states, because energy efficiency on buildings will help us in several ways. So we know that buildings represent 40% of our final energy consumption. So they consume a lot. And at the same time, here in Europe, the building stock is also old. Yeah. So 85% of our buildings were built before this century started. And those buildings, most of them will stay around also by 2050. we know that those old buildings, they will consume average twice as much energy as newly built houses. Therefore, it is very right moment to address this topic. And by renovation, by doubling renovation, we will create jobs mainly for small and medium enterprises all across Europe.
Sure.
But we will also help consumers. Their heating bills will be smaller. So by that, we will also secure the public acceptance, because this is very widespread expectation that green transition will cost a lot to average people. But by doing so that your heating bill will be smaller, I do believe that we will see millions and millions of households who are benefiting out of it.
Thank you for that, because you make a really important point that actually when we think about our current context of lockdown in various ways, it's the poorest communities that live in the poorest conditions in housing that have the least affordability for electricity or gas or heating and are at the extreme of fuel poverty. And I think that we are not keeping our eye on the ball on that one in terms of what that does to the sharp increase in poverty level, where people have to make a choice between, do I eat or do I heat? And I think that they shouldn't have to make that choice. The point that was made yesterday, actually, Kadri, I'd like you to address this if you can, and it's a challenging question, I know, but it'll be good to get that sense of what the issues are internally. And, you know, Maros yesterday was honest about it. When NG challenged him, they said, actually, you're on the renovation, which is excellent, electrification was missing. And actually, what we need is, if you're going to have electric cars, you need to have multiple use for, capacity in homes and renovations. We're not seeing that. And I suppose my point is, are you getting a view of renovation being something which is holistic, that looks at the digital aspect, the electric, you know, the charging aspect, making sure there's wind, solar potential in those, rather than simply creating resilient buildings of the future?
Yes, indeed. Well, renovation doesn't mean that we are just refreshing the paint. Well, let me emphasize the fact that, of course, we need the right type of renovation. And currently, only a fraction of renovation projects addresses energy efficiency. So we need more, and we need it already today and tomorrow. And I see this as an opportunity to transform our homes and our offices into smart units, to replace fossil fuels with green energy, both for heating and cooling, and also to install charging points for e-mobility. And we can also achieve the goal that we will empower our consumers. So to link individual buildings into districts or energy communities, to foster a sustainable construction sector and using natural materials and recycling waste. Well, by doing so, we will also base on analyses made by different organizations. For example, IRENA calculates that for every €1 million invested, 10 new jobs is created. And we calculate that to double our renovation rates, we need additional €275 billion to 2030. So that means lots of job opportunities for small and medium enterprises all across the member states. And well, this is an opportunity for construction sector, because they took a hit in the crisis, and that's why this helps us to achieve our climate target, our energy efficiency target that wasn't met by the national energy and energy climate plans. And it creates jobs and lowers heating bills. So,
indeed, let's hope. Let's hope that we get there, because you know, our biggest concern as a think tank, is that what happens to those who are furthest from the sense of the marketplace in jobs, good affordable housing, etc., and so forth, and levels of well-being. And it's those communities that we need to protect most in these vulnerable times. Can we turn to the grid? Because I mean, I encourage all of you on our Zoom audience, please take the opportunity. You've got the Energy Minister here, Energy Commissioner here, and so it'd be good to engage in a conversation with her about what she's doing, what her plans are. But that point that was made earlier, we have a TSO RTE here, and there was a kind of a subtle sense that perhaps the way the Commission is working, and these are my words, not his, is that that you're perhaps not bringing in the private sector that's central to this drive as early as you might, or at the first stages of your thinking, so you can bring them along as a partner to co-produce solutions? Kadri, are you doing that?
Yes, we are. Well, and there are different ways how private sector can contribute and give us added value. Well, I think there is a very good example on the field of hydrogen, green hydrogen. There was a broad interest all across the member states when me and Thierry Breton, responsible for industry, announced that we will create a hydrogen alliance. So there are more than 600 enterprises, universities, think tanks have announced that they are interested to participate, and they are, of course, all fully committed to the green transition, because our main target is to create a good market, both from consumer side and also from producer side, for green hydrogen that will replace first-hand side the hydrogen that we are using right now. And well, right now the market share for green hydrogen is only 2% here in the European Union. But of course, it helps us also to to phase out fossil fuels in some sectors where other solutions are not feasible, or they are just too expensive. So steel is the most prominent example.
Absolutely. And yesterday we heard from the European Investment Bank Vice President that, you know, the report that they recently released about their investments demonstrates we're not nearly there yet, because the vast, you know, over a third still goes in taxpayers' money, if you like, into subsidizing fossil fuels. And we understand the politics and the context for that, but we have a commitment that from her and the EIB that they will start from next year to stop that process, but also to make sure all their processes are Paris aligned. But from your perspective, for this to work, Kadri, we need member state coherence and cooperation, especially if the grid's going to work. It's the essential infrastructure, but also if we're all facing in the same direction. What's your sense or optimism about that happening from where you're sitting at the moment? And what you're, you know, we have a Belgian energy minister here, only 28 days into the job, by the way. But we have, you must be speaking to other energy ministers across the EU. What's your sense of the temperature on this one, to mind the pun?
Well, greetings to dinner. Well, we just had very good bilateral 2 days
Indeed.
ago. But well, the European Green Deal, it was originally, when we proposed it in the end of last year, it was supposed to be our growth strategy for the years to come. And now it is our growth and recovery strategy. We will have additional 750 billion euros recovery package. That will complement the next long-term budget. And it is also confirmed by the fact that 30% of these funds, they must go to climate-related actions. So basically now we have additional firepower. And of course, well, if we want to achieve our targets, we need significantly more renewables. So we need additional financing from private sector, from member states, but by doing so, for example, by investing into offshore wind parks, our national governments also will change their import portfolio, because right now Europe is one of the biggest fossil fuel importers. And
Exactly.
If we will invest into more renewables, then we tend to produce them in our own soil.
Yeah.
So we know that our future will need to base largely on renewables. The share of renewable energy needs to be already 40% for 2030. And for that, we need significant investments. And we have also produced guidance for member states how they should use their recovery and resilience funds. And I have no doubt that in their own unique way, each and every member state will also invest into grids and renewables.
Absolutely. I love the way you just said in their own unique way. Absolutely, they will be. But I suppose it's making sure we have coherence across the union. And I want to bring, as our other Zoom audience is being reticent or just really interested in watching rather than asking questions, I'm going to bring some of our contributors in to engage with you directly. But that point that about coherence between what the EU funds or invests in or develops and what the private sector does is something that was raised earlier on. And I want to bring Vincent from RTE to pose that question. And sorry to challenge you to do so and put you on the spot.
Thank you, Mrs. Commissioner, for your messages. I just have a question. As RTE is working at the moment with our fellow TSO colleagues in Europe to develop a methodology to assess our contributions to the reductions of carbon footprints, which is a complex issue. It's at our own perimeter, of course, but also as a kind of gatekeeper for the whole energy system. With no grid, there will not be energy transition or not fast decarbonization, as you mentioned. So it's a complex question. If we do things on some part of the value chain, it may have consequences, bad or good, on the other part of the value chain, and we have to have a global view on this analysis. So it would be interesting, I guess, for the grids and transmission grids to be part of the thinking of the future ecosystem that the Commission, I think, is working on for next year. And we are pleased to see that there are still the discussion about the new green industrial strategy that is underway, and to be sure that we are part of the discussion with all the elements we have to bring, and hopefully with some more better views on what is the contribution for decarbonization. Thank you.
So Vincent, thank you for that. So Kadri, if I may, in my words, can the private sector be more readily involved in this conversation? And are you thinking about the entire value chain rather than not thinking the full thing through and I suppose ending up with unintended consequences and having to solve a problem later down the line?
Well, indeed, we have to think about the full value chain.
Yeah.
And a life cycle of the energy that we use, and also the global impact, because well, we can do our part, but without partners following us, we will not achieve a major difference in the global warming. I think that the best example how we worked together with TSOs and with our international partners, it is the methane strategy that we launched just a couple of weeks ago. So we know that methane is the second most impactful greenhouse gas, and actually there is a immediate action that we can take to rapidly fight against the methane leakage. But we have to step up global efforts to reduce methane emissions, and what is surprising, this is often at net zero cost to the oil and gas industry. So we just need to address this topic, and we already do have our satellite technology that is capable to detect global super emitters. So there are not so many super emitters here inside the European Union, but again, if we keep in mind that we are big importers of natural gas and oil, then some of them might be in the other side of our distribution lane. And well, this is a topic that we will definitely raise with all our partners when we have energy dialogues. And here inside European Union, before we presented our strategy, we had a very good cooperation with stakeholders.
That's good to know. Kadri, going back to that question about coherence of what you're investing in R&D and what the private sector is, are you cited on that in terms, because that's going to be key as we transition, because we know we need a level of energetic innovation, and innovation's out there. We know we're very poor in Europe to taking it to scale. Sometimes that's to do with the single market not operating the way it needs to. But are you know, is the Team EU working in a way so you're cited on what you're investing in Europe in terms of R&D and making sure the private sector is part of that?
Absolutely. And we still know that there are some technological solutions where Europe holds global leadership. They tend to be at the renewable energy field, well, offshore, for example. And of course, there are some technological solutions where we lost our leadership, but we can regain it. And we have had good examples how those alliances will help us. So my colleague Maroš Šefčovič, I'm sure he told you a lot about batteries. He was responsible to launch a battery alliance, and it has been a very good example. And mainly because of that, we were so eager to launch also Hydrogen Alliance together with Thierry Breton.
No, indeed, he did. He waxed lyrical about it, and I said that in the most affectionate way because I think he was very frank and honest and direct about what some of the issues are, which is always refreshing from a politician and commissioner. So as you are yourself, tell me, as we look ahead, Kadri, we've got the recovery budget, we've got national parliaments having to vote on the new own resources, and there's a politics around that. We know time's running out. We have about 6 months to a year to make sure all of this is in place. What's your sense of the level of diplomacy you're having to get involved in to get this across the line? Which is, I know, is a tough question, and I know it's mired in politics, but it would be really good to hear, in terms of the leadership challenge for you, this is certainly going to be one of the biggest ones, no? Or is it something else?
Well, I do believe that this COVID outbreak in spring, it gave us a glimpse of the energy system of the future, where the demand for oil is low and renewables is the most resilient energy source. So actually in some member states, for instance, Austria and Denmark, we have had days where almost all the electricity has come from renewables. Mm-hmm. And during those past months, several member states have announced their phase-out date for fossil fuels, lignite and coal mainly, faster than it was expected. So with additional financing, member states can do it so that they will not leave anyone behind. Mm-hmm. We are very worried that those regions who have been dependent on mining activities for decades, that they will find new job opportunities. And for that reason, we also supported the Just Transition Fund that is dedicated to specific regions.
Sure.
So I think that we gave our member states the tools how they can achieve higher targets and at the same time support their people. And of course, there are very good examples when regions are phasing out, for example, coal electricity plants, and then the neighborhood becomes cleaner. Air is less polluted, and even in the winter time, the snow is whiter than it used to be when they used coal as a main source.
Indeed, but indeed, and sorry to cut across you, but the biggest issue is going to be having a commanding or a really persuasive narrative when you've got many people who are now spending more time in their homes, and they know that the energy bills are going to go up in a number of ways, and also for a lot of the member states that are now going through a very unforgiving second phase. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 months or 4 months' time. So there's something about how your plans almost have to become shock-proof or shock-resistant to know that we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know how sharper the economy is going to fall. And we know most of the public sector in Europe and elsewhere is up to its eyes in debt, the largest public sector debt we've ever experienced since the Great Depression, if not before. So there'll be a trade-off, which shouldn't be, between getting a job and focusing on the vote or transition. That shouldn't have to be a trade-off. But Laura, I want to bring you in on this, on this point, but any other point you would like to raise when, in the context of what you've heard from Kadri. Laura, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dharmendra, and Commissioner Simpson. Thank you for this very, very insightful and interesting comments. I think as we mentioned earlier in the debate, Europe is doing many, many things right, and I think getting in with the global diplomacy, we can really move further. Maybe one point from our latest analysis that I'd like to bring in that connects very well with what Commissioner Simpson said is the following. Very often we are focused on what are we building new in terms of climate change. So what is the next offshore wind facility that we're producing? What is the next hydrogen facility that we're producing? Which is excellent. There has to be this focus. However, what we have found recently is that the buildings we are living in, the power plants that we have built up to now, the industries that we have built up to now, so all the living environment which is around us by itself, if we don't do anything about it, will lead to global warming increase by 1.65 degrees, which is already by itself beyond the limit of 1.5 degrees. So for us, a key challenge here is a dual focus on focusing on the new and encouraging to act more and more on the existing infrastructure. So I go back and praising what Mrs. Simpson said about the building wave, but critically, we need to work much more closely with countries in the emerging world to attack, if you want, this existing infrastructure that by itself may put out of reach our goals. And maybe Mrs. Simpson could even give us a bit of a view on what Europe is doing with other countries around the world, notwithstanding the great work that they're doing on the recovery plan, the growth and recovery strategy.
Sure, Laura, and you've made this point before, that whole sense that we need a multi-level approach, but also let's not forget what we are sitting in at the moment that actually contributes to the problem rather than chasing the new. I'm going to bring in someone again from Twitter, our live stream audience. Charlotte, we have another question.
Yes, indeed, we do. For the
One second, Charlotte, we are...
Question is users by way of the solar panel.
Just need to hear you from you again.
Can you hear
very
me?
Quickly, yep.
Yeah, sorry. I hope you can hear me now.
Now, yeah.
Many people have become energy producers by way of the solar panels on their roof. How is the EU supporting them? Okay,
all right. So about that personal consumption and sort of decentralization of energy production and use. And we want to move to Bart. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, Bart Vivek from the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, Executive Director.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. You want my question, I guess.
Indeed I do. Indeed I do. It's a lovely image, but we need you to speak and contribute too.
Because I was just typing another question.
That's okay. Don't worry. I'm only joshing with you.
No, I had two questions. I mean, the first one is that, I mean, we often talk about international cooperation, and I fully agree this is very, very important that we work internationally together. However, maybe in Europe also we should think to work more strategically with other international countries. And for example, we could imagine that Europe will export technology, but we import energy. And is there any action that the European Commission is undertaking today in a more strategic approach towards international cooperation? This would be my question.
Thank you, Bart, for that. Kadri, can I come back to you now, please? So there's a set of issues here, Kadri, around this new strategic autonomy that's been articulated by yourselves. Something about how you work with partners globally to move this agenda forward. And it's a very difficult circumstance, obviously, given what's happening in our neighborhood, what's happening across the transatlantic next week. We'll know, depending on the outcome of the presidential election, whether, you know, climate's going to be up on the agenda or not globally, and whether we may have to reshuffle the deck in terms of how we really do business if there's a return to the previous administration. So there's a lot of dynamism in a both negative, positive way happening across the piece. So what are you doing to work with partners, other countries, on this agenda? But also, what are we doing in terms of individuals that, you know, the decentralization agenda, where you're putting power in the people's hands, power in the hands of people to produce and consume. What are you doing around that agenda? So those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for very good questions. Well, actually, Dharmendra, maybe you remember that last time when we met, you were moderating my debate, and very good debate with the African Union Energy Commissioner, Dr. Abu
Absolutely.
Zaid.
Yes.
So for us, well, the partnerships are very important ones. And we do see lots of interest also from African side. Of course, they have other challenges.
Yes.
But if we keep in mind that there are lots of consumers who don't have any access at all, then we have to well secure that if they will have access to electricity, then it's clean. And well, Africa has a waste potential for solar energy, for example. And this is also answer to part to that even our hydrogen strategy is not only for Europe, but it also shows that in not very far future we need more green hydrogen than most probably we will produce ourselves. So this is an opportunity also for our closest neighborhood. Well, every energy dialogue that we do have, we are well promoting our Green Deal.
Yeah.
And some of our partners, they do see that this is growth strategy and they are following our lead. So during past couple of months, we have witnessed that, for example, both Japan and China have announced their deadlines for climate neutrality. Just yesterday, I had a very interesting energy dialogue with OPEC. This is traditional format that the European Union and OPEC, the oil producers, do have. It was 14th already. But we also discussed our Green Deal, what will it mean for oil producers, how we can tackle methane emissions. So I think that many countries around the world are thinking that the market will change.
Yeah.
And what is their role there? Inside European Union, market will change too. And already my predecessor, Energy Commissioner Arias Cañete, negotiated the clean energy package. I myself, then I was minister responsible for energy during Estonian presidency, so I had a very good partnership.
Indeed.
And well, this package also gives us a chance all across Europe to accommodate the so-called prosumers, the small producers who sometimes use their green energy themselves, and sometimes they will need a chance to sell it to the grid. And this is possible in several member states already, and I think that the rest of us will follow the lead and will empower the producers, small producers.
Thank you. And no, I hadn't forgotten our last exchange about debating Africa, but, you know, rather than me say it, I wanted you to say it, because otherwise it would have been wrong as a moderator. But I'm glad you recalled that, because I think you're right. The EU-Africa relationship emerging that we are engaged with you on is a huge opportunity, I think, to work with one of the largest continents that's going to be a market maker for the rest of the world, but also create huge opportunities, but major challenges if we don't work effectively and in a balanced power sharing relationship with. I'm going to bring this to a close, Kadri, and I want to say thank you very much. I want to leave you with these two slides that we have from our citizens poll. We had annually a poll that we've been doing every year, asking two very simple questions. One is about, if the EU were there or not, what would it make a difference to your life? And the second one was that what areas should you prioritize over the next 5 years? And look at this one. So over 10,000, nearly just over 10,500 members from 11 member states said want the EU to prioritize the environment and sustainable future. So 49% said that. And the next slide that we have for you is that 44%, now this is like 18 to 44-year-olds, want the environment prioritized, making it a choice for young Europeans. So Kadri, I get a sense that last year, when we had the EU elections, we saw the largest turnout, bucked the trend for the past 20 years about turnout and a vote for green. And despite the burgeoning crisis that we've engaged in terms of both health and economic, there are people out there who really want climate action to happen. And I suppose that's a huge responsibility for you and others. But are you getting a sense that you have the right citizen context that you're working with to make sure, as one of the concerns we have, and we'll end on this point, is that how are you making sure that you're taking or enabling member states to take citizens with you? And this is not about the future of Conference of Europe. This is about how you engage in a fairly new kind of democratic approach, or a engaging approach to citizens on this critical agenda, so they don't get left behind, but also don't end up feeling this is not for me. Challenging question, I know, but share with us your thoughts as a closing remark.
Thank you. Well, we do know that there are lots of challenges ahead of us, but I also see that here in European Union we do have knowledge, we have willingness to achieve those, and now on top of that we have additional firepower with our next generation EU funds. So we should take good use of it, and with our member states.
Yeah.
Who most I hope that by the end of this year, all of them have supported our short-term goals too, so that we will reduce greenhouse gases at least 55% by 2030. Then it's achieved. And if we will achieve it, then it's already a matter of fact that the rest of the countries across the world will follow us.
Indeed. I suppose the issue is communicating better what the opportunity and choices are for citizens. I think that's so critical. So, you know, people understand that it's not a choice between a job or investing in transition. It's the same thing. It's like the virus crisis. People think about it as a health crisis, but actually it's both health and economic crisis. It's about bringing the two things together. And I hear you. And I think that it's going to be a challenging time, because national parliaments, as we know, are going to vote on the new own resources, but also they're going to submit their plans to you by the end of the year. So let's see what comes of that and your assessment of how ambitious they are. Colleagues, I have to draw this to a close. Kadri, thank you very much for joining us and being frank and responding quite effectively very effectively to our questions. We look forward to welcoming you again. And as I said to the EIB and others, that, you know, next year, let's see what progress we make. It'll be interesting to see, won't it, that whether the context we're living in has taught us the lessons that we need to learn. And the message that we've heard all this week so far is business as usual isn't going to work. We're going to have to work differently. We're going to build alliances in a different way, and actually think about shedding received wisdom about both economics and almost also about what we mean by a green transition, and what we need from the private and public sector, but create a different kind of alliance between public, private and citizen, because actually it behoves us to really hatch a different way of working in governance, that the biggest use of taxpayers' money on the one hand is going to make a difference both into their pockets but also into their livelihoods into the future, especially as a generation is living through this and won't be very forgiving. So let's see in 12 months' time what progress we meet, what lessons we learned. So thank you all very much. It's been lovely to have you over these past 3 days, and look forward to welcoming you again to another Friends of Europe online debate. Keep an eye on our website for future events. On the issue of space, I can just encourage you, and Kadri, you mentioned that point, and I know others are, we are going to have a very interesting conversation in November around digital twin Earth, where we're going to look at the capacities, but the jewel in the crown of Europe, where Copernicus and our satellite capacity has a huge potential to help us navigate both the issues around on a real-time basis, but also create the foresight we need to make the right policy choices on this agenda and others. Thank you all very much for contributing. Continue on the chat, and we look forward to welcoming you again. Thank you all our contributors. Thank you all for joining us and being patient, and look forward to welcoming you again. Be safe, mind your distance, and take care, and see you again. Bye-bye.